All right. Well, good morning or good afternoon to you all. Welcome to the Extended Disc webinar. It's a 30-minute webinar approximately. And today we're going to be talking about leading millennials, what every manager needs to know. My name is Christina, and I am a trainer here. And our guest today is my boss, Markku Kauppinen. He's the president and CEO of Extended Disc North America. Welcome.
Thank you, Christina. Good morning. How are you?
Good. We meet about once a month to do these webinars because the two of us, we seem to be traveling or crossing over. I just got back from California myself, and I know Markku's always off somewhere else. So it's good to see you, boss.
Good to see you as well.
So just a couple housekeeping tips today. This will be recorded, so any of your counterparts or anyone you know that wasn't able to make it today, we will have recorded it. I'll be posting it on the VIP client resource site along with the PowerPoints. Just another one, if you have any questions, we may or may not be able to get to it during this session, but please feel free to type it in the questions section and we will follow up right after we finish if we don't get to it. We also do just make a quick assumption that you have some working knowledge of DISC. So let's go ahead and get started. Markku, I know you just recently published an article about leading millennials. So we're doing this webinar today. What makes this topic so relevant right now?
Well, when we do trainings on extended disc, and I'm talking from a certification training or trainer training or any type of talks about extended disc, this topic almost always comes up. And also, you mentioned that article, Training Magazine asked me to write about this topic as well. And certainly if you do a Google search or look at the industry magazines, people are talking about millennials from different angles all the time. So I thought it was a timely time to talk about this in the webinar format, but also have a selfish reason. Mm-hmm. And that is that as we continue to grow, we are beginning to hire millennials, and I'm firsthand learning some of the challenges, and it's kind of a good reminder for me to understand how millennials are different and what do I need to know about it. And hopefully some of the ideas we'll share today will be relevant to our audience as well.
Totally agree. So let's talk about millennials.
Let's just get the slides moving here. There we go. Thank you very much. So millennials, now they are the largest generational group in the labor force. It really depends who the source is. The numbers change a little bit, but the bottom line, they are the most significant generational group now. Sometimes you hear about 70 million people, sometimes a little bit lower, sometimes a little higher, but the bottom line is that they are the most important group right now in terms of numbers.
It's amazing because sometimes, we think of, I just started learning about Generation X and now there's already a new generation. So some of us millennials are a whole new kind of understanding of this new generation that we have to work with.
That's right. And also definitions of who the millennials are vary a little bit, but typically people are looking at individuals who turn adults around year 2000, a little bit before, a little bit after. So they've been in the workforce for a while now, and they are, like I mentioned, this most significant group. And they are different from Generation X and baby boomers in several ways. And we are going to talk about some of those differences today. But I want to make sure that we are not talking just in terms of, like I'm looking at my kids. I realize I'm turning to my father, the kind of music they listen, etc. They seem very different. But I'm not talking about their appearance. I'm not talking about tattoos. By the way, I'm learning about man buns. That's a new thing for me.
New for me too.
And so I'm learning here right away. Apparently, if you cannot have a man bun and a facial hair. You can't have both. You have to choose which one you want to go with. So I'm going to make sure that everybody knows about that. But I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about the kind of words they use. And also, I'm not want to focus so much on how they use social media. Because certainly they are so engaged in social media. It's part of life for them. I'm not going to focus on that part of millennials.
Okay.
We'll touch on that when we look in terms of how they use technology and how they plan their personal work lives. But really what I want to focus more on is what are the specific expectations, attitudes, and behavioral styles of this group.
So how are millennials? Expectation, attitudes, and behavioral styles. What makes them different?
Well, like other generations, Generation X, baby boomers, etc., there's one thing I want to make very clear. that millennials, they are not all the same, meaning that we are still dealing with unique individuals. Mm-hmm. There are going to be some similarities when it comes to this generation, but still we need to always remember that millennials are still, just like everybody else, unique individuals. But from a DISC perspective, there's something quite interesting about this generation. So when we talk about baby boomers, they're about 27% I-style. This number is for United States. Mm-hmm. However, this number is pretty close to that all around the world. Some cultures a little bit more, some cultures and countries a little bit less. But for the most part, it's around that percentage.
So consistent.
Pretty consistent. Okay. And also, what's consistent about baby boomers, they're primarily S-styles. And if you think about baby boomers, those are the individuals who have long careers with the same organization. Mm-hmm. They get the gold watch after 40 years of very dedicated.
The lifers.
Exactly, dedicated service. But with the millennials, they are. Here we go. They are over 40% I-styles.
Wow, that is a big difference.
It's a very significant difference. And when you think about the I-styles, and we'll refer to I-styles a couple of times here today, I think you'll begin to understand they behave a little bit better. And by the way, this also is consistent around the world. I'm originally from Finland, and Finland has typically been known to be pretty reserved, more introverted country. Even 60 Minutes a long time ago did a show about how introverted Finns are. But even over there, over 40% of millennials are.
So even seeing the increase there as well.
That's correct. So, and this will kind of give us the backdrop or the context in which we try to understand millennials a little bit better.
So what does this mean in practice? What are millennials like in the workforce?
Well, if you think about I-styles, we are thinking about individuals who like a lot of variety. They don't like routine. They like to have the opportunity to interact with others. They really get energy for interactions with others, be it face-to-face or through social media. They want that type of interaction. So they tend to prefer a workplace
A workplace.
Thank you, Christina. Workplace that is fast-paced, stimulating, and more flexible. They don't like restrictions. They don't like routine. And for them also, multitasking is really a way of life. If I look at my kids, when they are watching TV, they're still on their phones. They are doing a lot of things at the same time. And if you contrast that to baby boomers, or people, I'm not quite a baby boomer, but I'm much older than millennials. Mm-hmm. I remember when multitasking was kind of a new concept. We started talking about multitasking, how do you get more things done? And then there started being discussion about, is multitasking really the way to go? Can you do it, etc. But for this generation, it's just the way you do things.
Yeah.
There's no, they don't think about it, they just do it. And also, they are everything blends together in their lives. Work and personal life tend to blend together. Mm-hmm. They don't think in terms of 9 to 5 or whatever the work hours are. They think in terms of everything blending together. So as a manager of Millennial, when I see them on their cell phone, their smartphone during the day, my kind of a temptation is to think they are goofing off. Mm-hmm. Maybe they are not focusing on work. But sometimes I need to be reminded that, hey, at nighttime, at 9 o'clock in the evening or in the weekends, they also check in work emails. They do that early in the morning. So everything blends very together.
Yeah.
And we need to just keep that in mind in trying to understand this generation.
What I'm thinking now is even I'm kind of that same generation as you. When I think of social networking, I tend to focus on the social part of it. But really with these new generations, social and networking, they blend together, and networking is sometimes even more of an emphasis.
Exactly. So, and sometimes people ask me, why is this? And I really don't have all the answers. But when I think of myself being in school, I remember having my own desk.
Yeah.
Everybody had their own desk.
Mm-hmm.
My kids, they're not quite millennials yet, but they are certainly been in school many, many years. Mm-hmm. They have learning centers.
Yeah.
They interact, and that's how they are brought up. And also talking about technology, it's important for us to remember that this stuff is not technology for them.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, because when they grew up, it all was there. I mean, certainly there's been more apps and things like that, but internet, the smartphones, all of these things were already there.
Yeah.
So they don't think in terms of something new. We think in terms of something new. For me, television, it was not technology because it was there when I grew up.
Computers,
that became technology. Sure. So there's a different way of looking at the world, and we need to understand those differences.
Yeah. So are there any other things that kind of helped us understand how millennials work in our work environment?
Well, one thing that they like, and keep in mind, they're mostly I styles. They like a fun workplace. They want to have the ability to interact and be around optimistic people and have fun. They again plan personal and work life also when it comes to social interactions with the employees. So we begin to see different kind of physical office environments. Mm-hmm. Office could look something like this.
Wow. I mean, it's like a fun play place.
Yeah, see, we if I'm an older person, I mean, these guys are just goofing off. They can't be working.
Yeah.
This is actually Google's office in Dublin, Ireland.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it looks fun, but I'm thinking about it. I don't know if I could be very productive in that kind of environment. It might take me some time to feel comfortable with this kind of environment.
It looks like a Star Wars battleship out of Legos they just built.
That's right. But this kind of environment creates creativity for them. This is where they thrive. And also, it's always good to remember when we talk about disc styles, for example, that if somebody is different in terms of their disc style, for example, if I'm a D, another person is an S, that S style can look very different. And we don't really understand. As a D, I don't understand how they approach things. But it's good to remember that that other person sees my behavior as strange too. Mm-hmm. Same thing happens with these generational differences. If I'm a baby boomer or I'm an older person and I look at this kind of office and I think that, hey, looks very strange.
Yeah.
I don't know how you can be productive in there. If they were to see the kind of office environment where I started my career, it looks something like this.
Yeah.
You know, I had my first cubicle.
Yeah.
Bosses had the office on the left, and the doors were typically closed.
Yeah.
And this was the kind of work environment that we started our careers in, and that was comfortable for us. But if you have this kind of an environment for millennials, it's going to be more of a challenging environment for them to feel like they're engaged, are productive, and are motivated to achieve the organization's goals.
Yeah.
So I think these things are changing, and as organizations, we must be able to make those kind of changes in order to make sure that everybody's being productive.
I know all those of us, this looks familiar. The other one probably looks less familiar, but it's definitely around now. We definitely see it. I just did a training in California, and it was not cubicles. It was workstations and ping pong tables and open space. So
we need to be willing to make these kind of changes, and we must make these kind of changes if we want to be a competitive employer in today's marketplace. Again, remember, 70 million of these are right there. So, and organizations are competing for their talent. Another thing about millennials is that they tend to get bored a little bit more easily. Again, think in terms of I styles. If there's not a lot of change, variety, my motivation is going to go down. And I styles and the millennials, and again, please remember, not every millennial is an I style, but as a generation, they mostly are. I styles, millennials, sometimes they are so enthusiastic and optimistic in their outlook that they, in essence, overcommit. And sometimes they may have trouble keeping those deadlines, not because they don't want to meet the deadlines, but simply because they overcommit. And kind of related to that is that sometimes their plans are a little bit too lofty. They think they are able to accomplish everything, and they simply cannot. It's too much on their plate. So, I think as a manager, even just hearing this gives us much more awareness of this type of generation. But as a manager, what do I need to be more aware of? What are some things I need to know as a manager? Well, one thing is that certainly I need to adjust. I can't continue managing and leading my employees the same way. I need to learn to modify my behavior. And when it comes to millennials, some of the things I may want to keep in mind is that they tend to have a little bit of a shorter term perspective. They hope to achieve results a little bit quicker. If you think in terms of S styles and C styles, but they're a little bit slower to initiate and start. But once they start, they're often unstoppable because they have this, like S styles, for example, they want to put a plan together. That takes them a little time, and maybe D style thinking, why is the person not really taking action right now? The reason is that they want to have a plan together. They want to know how to move forward. And once the plan is together, they execute.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I-styles and millennials are a little bit more impulsive, and they want to kind of jump feet first, and then they start moving. But if they don't get the results as quickly,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes their motivation begin to diminish, and they want to move on to something else. And also with this generation, they tend to change jobs more frequently. And by the way, they often use the term role. They don't think of themselves as having a job. Often they think in terms of having a role in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
As a manager, I must keep that in mind because I must make it clear how their role fits in the overall picture, how their contributions contribute toward the overall goals of the organization. They want to have that connection to the organization, not just having a job at the organization. And as people often say, people don't quit the organizations, they quit their bosses. And if I'm an older boss and I'm trying to motivate, engage, millennial, and if I don't quite understand where they're coming from, if I don't understand them, chances are very good that they don't understand me. So I really must understand my employees, how they are different, and then make conscious decisions about how to modify my behavior.
Yeah, I think it's critical, what you pointed out. If this is a group that tends to change jobs more frequently, they don't see it as unusual to move job to job or that short term perspective. I think almost like our role as a manager is even more critical when you say people don't quit organizations, they quit their bosses.
It's for managers sometimes easy to forget, but that's typically what happens.
So, okay, now that I am, or we are more aware, what are some things we can do?
Well, I'm gonna talk about the 4 strategies for success that I mentioned in that article that was in the training magazine, and I'll help our audience give you some information how they can find that online at the end of this webinar. But I talked about 4 strategies in that article, and by all means, these are not all inclusive. This is not the only thing you have to do, but I think this will be helpful for managers. And one of them, and the first one I want to talk about is that as a manager, we need to understand the organization style. If I'm a mid-level manager, that typically means I must understand the employees that report to me, who they are. If I'm a CEO, then I need to understand the entire organization, because if I'm the captain and I don't understand what kind of ship I'm steering, I'm going to get lost, or I'm not going to be able to maneuver it most effectively, most efficiently. If I have a fast speedboat, that's one thing. If I have a huge ocean-going freighter, that's another thing. So I really need to understand who I'm actually leading, what my employees look like. And I'm sure many of our audience members are familiar with extended this team assessment. So you can really clearly map what kind of employees you have. Let's say I'm a manager of 15 employees. If I understand the styles of each of my employees and also understand them as a team, I'm much better equipped to communicate with them. Let's say I need to start a new initiative, some kind of change is about to take place. If I understand upfront what kind of expectations my employees are going to have, how much resistance I might expect to have, I'm in much better position to have a successful outcome, whatever the case may be. So I can look at the aggregate level, looking at my entire team, my entire organization, but then also can look at each individual. When I'm meeting with a certain person, how do I need to modify my behavior? So that's the first step.
Okay.
Second is, and this is something that is so easy to do, that we jump into conclusions. I think I might have mentioned already, but I realized that I'm becoming my father when I'm dealing with my kids, and I just can't understand how that happened. But it seems to happen to all parents.
It does. How did we become our parents?
Yes. How did we get so old all of a sudden?
Yeah.
How we just got so dumb? I don't get it. But when I'm looking at the younger people, I realize that I'm having same kind of assumptions, and I jump into conclusion about them, which I'm sure my parents did. So we need to leave these negative stereotypes behind. It's human nature to have these, but we really, if we want to be more successful, we really need to try to leave those behind. When we look at millennials, you hear all kind of things. Time magazine had a cover of the me generation. They're all focusing on they're lazy. They're focusing on themselves. I heard a keynote speaker a few years back say that this is the first generation whose self-esteem exceeds their talent.
Wow.
So that's a pretty harsh thing to say.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think that person really believed it. I think she was making a point about that these individuals are different, but we need to make sure that we leave these negative stereotypes behind.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of stereotypes, we need to make sure that we understand not all of the millennials are the same.
Right.
They are still, as I mentioned earlier, unique individuals, and we need to understand who they are.
Yes.
Also, do not assume things. When we see them on Facebook at their work desk, whatever that work space might look like, maybe they have a laptop on their ping pong table and they are looking at Facebook at 2:00 in the afternoon. I may assume that this person is lazy because they are doing their personal Facebook stuff. I should not do that. It's just that they really plan their personal work lives. And they are going to do some of those social things during the day. They might post something on Twitter, for example, but it doesn't mean that they are lazy. They're not goofing off. And I just need to make sure that I don't think of them that way because they do things differently. Yeah. That's all they're doing. Their behavior is different, not worse, it's just different.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some of us, our generations, like you come to work. You keep your work and social separate. But you're talking now, there's more the seamless kind of integrating of work and personal life for this generation.
Yeah, that's how we were brought up. This generation was brought up differently in a completely different kind of environment. The world is different.
Yeah.
It's so interconnected. When I grew up in Finland, in the 80s and 70s, it was a separate part of the world. Now, when you go to Finland, it's part of the world. And
that's a good point.
Yeah, and when people grow up in not only being able to connect with anybody in the world, in any place in the world, not only like in Finland now, people are speaking English a lot more because that's how they're growing up, having friends throughout the world. And in order to communicate, they learn English. They don't want to study English. They automatically learn it because that's what the world is like.
Okay.
Third, now going back to managers, and this is something that will be familiar to many of our audience members because this comes down to really using the DISC model. We need to equip our managers to adjust their behavioral style. And it goes down to those 4 familiar steps. First, you need to understand what are the DISC styles, how they are different, D's, I's, S, and C's. You need to have a confident understanding of that. And as a manager, the second step is that I need to have this confident self-awareness, who I am, how do I tend to communicate, how do I make decisions, how I lead my employees. And the reason we must have the confident self-awareness is that we need to be also aware when we tend to fall on autopilot, when we begin to repeat those behaviors that are most comfortable to us. And we cannot be on autopilot if we want to be successful. We need to learn to identify styles of others. If I don't have the benefit of having my employees DISC assessments, then I need to learn some skills how I identify what style they are. If it's millennial, not all of them are I styles, so I need to be able to identify the C style millennials as well. Of course, this applies to every generation. But the fourth and most important step then is how do I now modify my behavior? Instead of going to the autopilot, what are the conscious decisions I'm going to make about how I modify my behavior with this person at this present moment?
Great. So, I mean, I think what we're saying is basically, we have our own DISC style or our own self-awareness of our style, but we can't communicate with everybody else the same way.
That's right. So I mean, those principles still apply with millennials. There's some things that we see them do differently and how they see the world differently from us if we happen to be an older manager. Last step, and I think is probably in many ways the most important, is that how do we actually partner millennials with others in the organization? Because it is very easy when we talk about the generations to have these us versus them situations, and that can create that environment. Millennials begin to hang out together. It's just like I styles tend to hang out together and S styles tend to hang together. We want to make sure that that doesn't happen. It's easy if you don't do something about it that this will happen, but it's very dangerous because
that gap widens.
The gap widens, and then the organization is not working toward common goals. Each group is focusing on them and what's best for them. And as a manager, what you really need to do here is practice some humility.
Tell that to a D.
Yeah, except, successful D style humility is going to be difficult to learn. But if you tie to their achieving results, they can actually realize that, hey, in order for me to become more successful, humility is going to help me. And I'm talking about humility in a way that you can actually learn a lot. Mm-hmm. And I personally have experienced this in the recent months when we have been hiring more millennials. Mm-hmm. And I'm beginning to realize that really firsthand how they see the world, how they communicate differently, and how actually their way of using what I call technology. Yeah. They don't really call it technology. Right. It's still technology for me. How they use the technology to be able to communicate with customers, with prospects, with others in the organization. It's really opened my eyes. I'm still learning a lot. I'm early on learning this stuff. Me too. But if you are able to just shut up and listen, you can really learn a lot. And also, as a manager, I need to make sure that I do have experience on my side. I've seen many things. I have more knowledge about a lot of things. But I can't just tell them, watch me do it and learn it. If I'm going to take that kind of attitude, they are not going to be engaged. And also, I'm not going to learn in that process. Mm-hmm. So when we do these things, practicing humility, learning from them, everybody learns. There's so much we can learn from these millennials I've learned recently that I really wasn't even aware. And it's amazing when you simply be quiet and listen and see how they do things, how different, completely new aspects of communicating with others and doing things, daily tasks. I've just learned so much that it's really incredible. So everybody learns. And if we begin to stimulate that type of environment in the organization where we have project teams, we have mentoring programs, social activities, it really stimulates this creativity and environment where everybody can really find their role, mm-hmm. contribute to the overall goals, and everybody finds better ways of doing things and achieving the goals together.
Yeah, I think just even my own kind of bias coming into this, I was thinking, as a manager, what can we do? But really, like you said, it's a two-way street. We can walk away with a lot more experience and understanding. So not only that, I also think, we talk about millennials, but, we have millennials as managers, right?
There are a lot of them who are managers.
Yeah, so, and they can use it too.
Yeah, we've been talking about here at this webinar today how kind of almost the backdrop has been, I'm the older person, I'm managing these younger people. But a lot of these people are
millennials,
and a lot of baby boomers are working for millennials.
Exactly.
All of these principles apply. And by the way, it's a two-way street. Mm-hmm. If you're a millennial, you can look at this and just kind of flip the roles and the different behaviors. When you look at older people and say, it's so strange how they just, they don't talk about personal lives at work, or they don't use technology very effectively. This is how they were brought up, and this is how they see the world. And if we learn from each other, mm-hmm. that's when everybody wins.
And, Markku was talking about, he had, Markku published an article just recently. And if you are interested in just taking a look at the article, or even I would highly encourage you to just share it with your managers, you can go to our Extended DISC website, and under resources, if you click on the resources tab, and go to blog. Is that right, Markku?
Yeah, you go to resources, then you select blog. And I think there's a couple of more recent blogs, but mm-hmm. I think on the first page you will find this this article that covers exactly these topics in a little bit more detail, mm-hmm. obviously, than in this webinar. And I also had some clients actually contact us and ask that, can we share this article mm-hmm. with our employees or with our managers? And honestly, we do need to get the permission from the training magazine, okay. but they've given it to us every time somebody asks. So if you want to share with your employees, just shoot us an email, okay. Say that you want to do that, and we'll get the permission, and you can, download it, print it, and share the information with others.
That's good to know. So, any final thoughts?
Keep learning. Hey, yeah. That's what I'm kind of excited to think about what I learned from our millennials today. It's a new world for me, and just keep learning.
Sounds great. Well, thank you, Markku. Like I said, Markku and I meet up about once a month to do these webinars. And that leads you us into, we do have another webinar scheduled. We have it for Wednesday, October 17th, same time, 10 o'clock.
August, not October. I think you said.
This is what happens to me when I'm on California time. Sorry, Wednesday, August 17th, 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. We're going to talk about how do you ensure you're not taking your strengths for granted. So don't take your strengths for granted. That's the topic of our next webinar. Markku will be here again with myself, and we will be sending out information on how to register. So thank you all again. Thank you, Markku.
Thank you, Christina. I'll see you in a month, apparently.
It sounds good. All right. Take care, everyone.